Hello everybody, it's Wyron here with another bit of the Warhammer 2 Cool Wake Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Waldenhof, playing a bit of good old classic Empire against Chaos. So, for my lineup this time around, I did decide to run the Emperor himself, Karl Franz. And so, Karl of course is a pretty powerful melee combatant. He's here on Deathclaw. And he's a all-over rather solid lord. Well over 4,000 HP, solid armor, good all-around stats, armor piercing, which he has built in normally, and a massive charge bonus of 90, makes him a very good sort of assassin hero who can dive in and out of combat very, very easily. I did bring him in with Foe Seeker, of course, so they can get out of a tough spot a little faster, stand your ground, just usual survivability, and both the Reikland Runefang as well as Galmraz, which are some pretty massive, both offer some pretty massive buffs. Galmraz, of course, increasing your damage and bonus against large, and Reikland Runefang simply buffing Karl Franz as well as all the units around him pretty significantly. Plus 26 melee attack is nothing to sneeze at. Of course, Karl does not have any source of self-sustain, which is a little bit of a problem, and that is why I did bring a Jade Wizard on the ground. Also, with this sort of build, Karl is not the worst at sniping large lords like, say, Kolek, for example, or Sartoriel. He can kind of dive in and definitely dish out a bit of hurt to him, though, of course, he can't stand and fight against, say, Kolek in a straight-up, drawn-out engagement. I did, of course, bring him in alongside an Amber Wizard, trying to do the double terror bomb up in the sky. The Amber Wizard, of course, is coming in with only Wissen's Wild Form for that simple, cheap buff. Good old Wild Heart, just for improved power reserves when I do cast that, and a Power Stone, which gives me a decent amount of essentially battery for my casters. On the other end, the reason I basically need the Power Stone, the Jade Wizard, coming in with Regrowth and Dwellers Below. The reason I did not bring Earthblood, which I know is a very common pick, is because Earthblood affects an AoE, and the way I intended to set this army up was going to be very, very wide and separate, so at best I'd be casting it on, say, one unit, and usually you overcast Earthblood, at which point it's barely cheaper than Regrowth. For my front line, it is composed entirely of Unbreakable units with Sigmar Sons, Flagellants, and Tattershoals, covering the frontal arc. These guys are really there to beat up on squishy units, and mostly to just soak up the enemy attack. Behind them, two highly veteran handgunners, who are there to kind of bait my opponent, make it look like this is all my army. Two spears in the back, just covering the rear, and then the Royal Outlaw Griffites in the very back. On the flanks, I was thinking about doing something a little sneaky, so I have the Silver Bullets as well as Sterling's Revenge, covering the edges, hoping to bait my opponent into this kind of central position, and then into this pocket, and then attacking them from the flanks. I didn't want to try out Dwellers Below because I haven't really tried it out very often. I don't play Empire as much as I used to, because I've tried to play different factions, and so I wanted to try out Dwellers Below, just see how it is, if it's still as good as it was in Warhammer 1. Though, of course, it has been nerfed a little bit as far as the cost goes. 20 cost rather than what it used to be, 17. For my opponent, he did go very, very wide, and this definitely caught me by surprise. It's not something I think you see all that often with Chaos, but it's very cool nonetheless. I think it's a pretty awesome build. He did come in with Sigvald, who came in with Foe Seeker, Deadly Onslaught, and of course Standard Die. Though surprisingly, my opponent did not bring Auric Armor, which is something you don't usually see with Sigvald, because that makes Sigvald incredibly tanky. For his front line, he did bring a whole bunch of Chaos Marauders. These guys will do very poorly against my front line, but at the same time they will potentially soak up fire. They can still do decent amounts of damage, nonetheless, against unarmored Flagellants, and they will trade very well against the vast majority of Empire infantry, given how cheap they are. Behind that, he does have really the main damaging component of his army. He does have some units of Forsaken, two of them in the sides, and then third in the back. 3 units of Chaos Warriors with Great Weapons, and then 2 units of Chaos Warriors with Halberds. So he's going very kind of mid-tier with his infantry, and that is amazing, because Chaos mid-tier infantry is actually very, very solid. So I actually think this is a pretty cool build. He does have a Chaos Sorcerer of Death in the middle here with Spirit Leech and Fate Opuna, which are, of course, very powerful spells. And with this sort of build, he can time out down my front, get around my flanks with Forsaken, and just be an all-around nuisance. On the flanks, he finally does have 2 units of Chaos Warhounds with Poison, which is on each end, so 4 total, which is a little overkill almost, I would say, but definitely a cool idea, because you can, of course, this way you can kind of infiltrate into the back line and just be a general menace. My opponent is swinging very wide with him, and so what I'm trying to do is catch him with my terror-causing units, because their morale is very, very low. So I can catch him and fear and terror out him very quickly. Then I can get rid of him and potentially route him off and away from the map. Unfortunately, I do mess up a little bit here, and though I do manage to route 1 unit of Chaos Warhounds through terror, my Amber Wizard gets caught out, and as you can see, the Chaos Warhounds actually taking a unit of Chaos Warhound does start slowing him. That is one of their key purposes, of course. They start slowing him, they poison him, and that's a big, big problem. So I do dive back in with Karl Franz, just trying to terror out the Warhounds. Warhounds are the biggest counter here. If I can shut down the Warhounds, then the rest of these units will not be able to stand their ground again. It will not be able to catch Karl and the Amber Wizard, who can just kind of plow through with their mass. Now, in the meantime, my opponent is pushing in. I did manage to hold fire after the initial volley. And now I'm about to unload on the Chaos Warriors with weapons, who will of course trade incredibly well with my front line, which has terrible armor piercing. And so my handguns are opening up on them and doing quite a bit of damage in this opening volley, and they have a decent amount of kind of arc to attack from. Now my Sterling's Revenge is opening up on the people trying to surround my Amber Wizard, but the Amber Wizard's still taking quite a bit of heat. You can see my Flagellants are throwing themselves into the fray, and they will absolutely melt these Chaos Marauders in a very, very short period of time. Sigmar Shuns are even better, thus they're probably one of the best unbreakable units in the game. Unfortunately, I do make a mistake here with the silver bullets, and I allow them to get caught by the Forsaken. I should have definitely been a little more cautious and waited for my Spearmen and Royal Elder fights to get clear. So these silver bullets are in for a really, really bad time. You can see they're already getting shredded. Flagellants, though, are doing rather well. These handgunners are pushing forward a little too much. I'm definitely not as much on top of my... sorry about that, guys. I'm definitely not as much on top of my sort of micro as I should be. You can see these Forsaken are sneaking by. I'm having a bit of a trouble here. I do drop Carl into the back just to tear out these guys. And my Amber Wizard has actually been forced to rout. But I do see an opportunity here. My opponent has clumped an incredible amount around my Spearmen. He does have some Forsaken running around, but still, this is an incredibly horrible clump for him. And I'm going to drop a Dwellers Below, and we're going to see the mighty Dwellers Below just annihilating these troops. In the back, in the meantime, you can see I've broken my opponent's front line. The Chaos Warriors are still doing okay, but they're getting bogged down in infantry. And you can see these Dwellers Below are just tearing these guys apart, dragging them to the depths. Forsaken are tanking their HP pool. You can see the Chaos Warriors are getting torn up. It's not as powerful as it used to be, but it is still a very, very potent spell. Over here, it's also important to keep in mind that all the infantry has been buffed in its HP pool, so it's actually entirely possible that it has not really been nerfed, that it simply just doesn't do as much damage relative to the new HP pools. Over here, the Spearmen are attacking down the Forsaken, and unfortunately, I allow my Royal Elder Griffites, who are chasing all these hounds, to keep pursuing them, and I really should have pulled these guys back to deal with the Forsaken and the my opponent's infantry here. The handgunners are actually holding out because they were highly veteran up. They actually have a melee defense of 22, which is decent at just holding for a little while against units with fairly low melee attack. But I'm trying to kind of jump around with Scarlet Friends, cause some damage. I do pop Reichel and Runefang and Foeseeker and all that sort of stuff, but I'm being hit by Spear Leech, which is draining my HP. And in the meantime, my opponent, because he has such a wide army, is getting into my backline and causing me a great deal of pain. Now my Amber Wizard routed off very, very far away, but now he's coming back. He has popped his Power Stone, giving me a massive amount of, or massive influx of Winds of Magic, and I'm now trying to terror bomb these Chaos Warriors, getting this Jade Wizard in here, and just trying to kind of time down and do as much damage as I possibly can. You can see I've popped another Power Stone there, and I actually have it. My bad. Thought I saw the Jade Wizard there popping the Power Stone, but I had not. I'm kind of jumping back and forth. My opponent does drop a Fate of Butte on Sterling's Revenge, which is interesting, but not necessarily a bad idea, because that will, of course, do quite a bit of damage to him. And I don't have he doesn't have very many good targets, except for the Demigryphs, but they're very far away, and they have just finished slaughtering his Forsaken. So what's the big problem for me is that my opponent, while I have largely wiped out most of his infantry, he still has these two massive blocks of Chaos Warriors with halberds, and of course my very large heavy army is going to struggle against that. I'm being hit by a Spirit Leech again on Carl Friends, and that's really whittling him down. My Amber Wizard does dive in, and I'm just trying to focus down these units here, terror out of that sort of stuff. In the meantime, Sigvald, who is pretty terrible at killing individual infantry units, is trying to pick off these handgunners, definitely struggling a little bit. In the meantime, I'm kind of able to run roughshod over this infantry here. I do push in the Royal Elder Griffites, just trying to get some terror in. My opponent sees that, and he pulls the Chaos Warriors off the line to go chase after him, and that's definitely a bit of a problem for me, though the Royal Elder Griffites, as you can see, are tearing through this Chaos Sorcerer of Death very, very quickly. In the meantime, there are all these routing units. You can see I see these Forsaken. I'm trying to get at them, and in the meantime, I'm starting to pound on these Chaos Warriors with halberds with my handgun line, which is kind of still around. Some troops are still there. I'm able to jump in on these Forsaken, cause a few kills, and immediately force a rout, which is really good. They're pretty quick, so they'll rout off pretty far. You can see these Spearmen have rallied, and they're coming back. Once these Forsaken are broken, I'll be at a good spot. Now you can see that this balance of power is very, very even right now, and rather late into the game at that. Fortunately, these Sterling's Revenge will shortly rally, and that will give me an opportunity to hopefully try to shoot down these Forsaken a little bit more, who are slaughtering my poor Spearmen. And though things are very even, I do still have the power of this sort of flying air corps of an Amber Wizard, Carl, and the Demigryphs, flying / cavalry corps. Though you can see another Spirit Leech going down. My opponent had a lot of Winds of Magic this game. It was causing me a great deal of pain. I do finally catch this Chaos Sorcerer of Death, though, or I'm about to catch him, and that will hopefully help me put me in a better spot. Now, once again, my opponent did clump up his infantry, trying to finish off my infantry, and I will get another beautiful Dwellers Below. And you can see it's absolutely annihilating these Chaos Warriors with halberds. Let's just see how much damage it does. They start off at about 5,800 HP, and by the time the Dwellers Below does end, they are going to be reduced. We'll see in a little bit. They're going to be reduced to about half their HP, so it was about 2,400 HP damage. So pretty solid, though definitely not as powerful as it was before. I do believe it's just been a straight nerf. Now my Demigryphs are chasing off this Chaos Sorcerer of Death. They are running him down. I don't actually recall if I managed to kill him off It looks like he's broken, though he still hasn't shattered despite being at 28 HP. And now the demigriffs are being tied down by Forsaken, which means that this guy's probably going to escape. In the meantime, my flyboys have still stayed up in the air. They're still alive. You can see my handguns are trying once again to reform and unload on these guys in the back. And so these warriors with halberds are definitely a big nuisance here. So now I got to cycle charge him. I'm going to try to keep at least something on the ground alive, and just cycle charge this group down here on the ground to death. And as you can see, the balance of power is slowly shifting in our favor. You can see a lot of my opponent's infantry is kind of wavering and coming back every now and then. It's very difficult for me to just shut them down permanently. You can see these poor handgunners are routing again, but because they're fairly high veterancy, they are coming back fairly consistently. I'm trying to chase off these Chaos Warriors with halberds. They are fairly low on HP, down to 50 models. But because there's so much infantry here, my troops are kind of getting bogged down and just struggling to pursue. And you can see my rollout of Corvettes have taken quite a bit of a beating. They're very low on HP now, and they're down to less than half HP and only 19 models. But you can see I'm still unloading on these Chaos Warriors with halberds, and of course the usual chaos problem of struggling against fear and terror. Now Carl over here does actually have a pretty cool ability that I didn't mention initially, but when you have a Griffin for everyone except Boris, there's a pretty cool ability on him called Blood Roar, as you can see here, and that is a constant AoE 8 leadership debuff when your lord is in melee. Over here you can see Carl does get a dive in on Prince Sigvald, knocks him down a bit, drops him down to 2200 HP or a little under, and this is actually rather nice because Carl is actually rather good because my opponent didn't bring auric armor, so he's going to be very susceptible to that sort of stuff. And I'm able to get another charge into these Chaos Marauders and rout them off. That Blood Roar is definitely a huge benefit. If it's the constant -8 leadership debuff is huge. Demigriffs are trying to just rout off these troops, just run them down, and hopefully just shatter these troops, but it's very difficult. These guys still do have fairly high leadership in spite of everything that's going wrong, and they're sticking around. My handguns are trying to get into position to shoot these guys in the back. Unfortunately, these Warhounds have actually come back, or my opponents finally noticed them. They routed off very far away early on. He's bringing them back into the fray, which is a bit of a problem. Over here, Carl is, who was hit by a regrowth, by the way, that's why he's decent HP, is over here beating up on these Chaos Marauders. And you can see my demigriffs are trying to come back and save these Chaos Warhounds, but it's just not happening. The Chaos Warhounds get on top of my handguns, and the handgun line is dead. There's no saving them now. Fortunately for me, though, the demigriffs will be able to reach the fray just in time, and they are going to tear through these guys very quickly. And they do cause terror, so they'll tear out the Chaos Warhounds fairly quickly. So now I'm reduced to only 3 units on the field, which is my routing Jade Wizard, who will not come back. He's completely broken. But I do still have Carl, and I do still have these Royal Dwarf Griffites, and Carl is still fairly healthy at 2500 HP. He's healthier than Sigvald. You can see these Chaos Warriors are very low on HP, and the demigriffs, while definitely not healthy, are healthy by the standards of this match. These Chaos Warriors can't really, or Chaos Marauders can't really hurt him. The only thing that can hurt him is those guys, the Chaos Halberds, but they are very, very low. So now what I'm doing, what's kind of important when you're low, when everything's low and the game matches down to the bitter end, trying to pick off isolated units. So I'm going after these Chaos Marauders over here, diving in on them with Carl, and my opponent, seeing that he will not really be able to break me, he's going to lose these troops, and then be stuck with just this core here against a whole bunch of angry demigriffs, and Carl does decide to end the game. So definitely a very, very close match. As you look at the losses, a lot of it has been simply getting down to terror, constantly pushing all these units away, because of course Chaos is very susceptible to that sort of stuff. As you can see, my unbreakable blocks of units did rather well. The handguns did pretty well. The Sterling's Revenge did pretty well. The poor Silver Bullets did not, and that is purely comes down to my poor micro. I'm not going to try to defend that. That was just a very bad play on my part. I tried to flank, and it bombed, and it was a bad idea. You can see interestingly enough, one of the units of Chaos Warhound with Poison was very high veterancy. I'm not entirely sure why this is. Perhaps to prevent those routes. The Olde Griffites performed incredibly well. This was a very good matchup for him in general, except those Chaos Warriors with halberds. I was definitely happy with how the Amber Wizard and Carl were definitely able to disrupt my opponent, but that overload of Chaos Warhounds with Poison was definitely a bit brutal to deal with, especially early on when I tried to rout him off and failed. That was a little bit of a risky move, and it didn't pay off, though it is often a pretty useful thing to do. You can rout off Warhounds pretty effectively and kind of zone them away, so then when the main engagement happens, your opponent doesn't have this fast support. Obviously, I saw my opponent didn't have any cavalry, and that was why I felt gutsy enough to go for it. If I had seen my opponent had Chaos Knights or Kolek, I would not have gone for that sort of attack. For my opponent, those Forsaken performed incredibly well. Of course, the Chaos Warriors with great weapons performed really well. Sigvald performed rather well. The lack of auric armor on Sigvald, I do believe, was a bit of a mistake, because had he brought that, he would have been able to keep Sigvald healthy right up to the end game. And perhaps that could have swayed the tide one way or another, or definitely made things even closer than they already were. Nonetheless, I do believe this was a really fun game. I definitely like my opponent's build. I think it's a pretty cool way to play Chaos. I usually rely on Chaos Knights and kind of the big nasties like Kolek, but I think Prince Sigvald in this sort of build is definitely pretty cool. I think it's pretty awesome why the Wise Men of Gotham here decided to run. Definitely made it a very close match. I definitely got a little lucky with some of the clumps and landing good Dwellers Below. 2 Dwellers Below were game changers. So Dwellers Below is still a powerful spell, just not as powerful as it used to be, and that is probably for the best because it used to be pretty broke OP. But yeah, it was a very fun game. Pyrrhic victory, right down to the wire. Lots of fun. Definitely recommend Karl Franz. Definitely recommend trying out the Amber Wizard with the Griffin. And if you do in campaign, he can also get the Griffin. So pretty awesome. You can make some pretty crazy. Empire can probably make the best, one of the best, if not the best, Air Force builds, just because you can get lores on Griffins like that, or heroes on the Griffins like that. So I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. Any comments, criticism, any questions about Warhammer 2 or Quick Match or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can. Yeah, as usual guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.